that's I'm still talking about the same guy. So, Chief Gunner's mate John Henry Turpin was born the 20th of August, 1876, in Long Branch, Monmouth County, New Jersey. Long Branch is a beachside city in Long Branch, which is just across the bay from New York City. Let's see. Okay, there we go. John Henry Turpin lived in this house there. This is the one. It's 1 block long and less than a third of a mile from the Jersey shore. The house pictured here is present day, but is part of it's part of his history of that block for where JHT lived. So as a young man, he stated earlier was just a few blocks from the water, noticing all the large ships passing by and entering the New York harbor, as they were located just adjacent to the entrance into the harbor. And so as a young man of 7, he was noted in his file as being an apprentice boy working in the United States Navy. There is also 7 President's Park, and he may have seen Rutherford B. Hayes just across the street from his home is an elementary school. So that was pretty interesting. It was a pretty interesting area that he lived in. Long Branch's early years as a resort town was a virtual who's who of society, including the names of Astor, Fisk, and Drexel, and even more notorious names such as Diamond Jim Brady and Lily Langtry. First Lady Mary Lincoln visited in 1861, but it was in 1869 that Long Branch had its first presidential visit by President Grant. The president continued to visit every summer that he was president and continued for many years after that. So it was a very popular place right where he lived for notable people. In 1870, a racetrack opened, which is still thriving today, and soon after, casinos. Long Branch was in its heyday, such as was the reputation for 7 other presidents that following here. Let me go down here. Okay. Okay, so 7 other presidents followed and visiting here. Chester A. Arthur, Rutherford Hayes, Benjamin Harrison, William McKinley, Woodrow Wilson, and James Garfield were frequent summer visitors. After an attempt was made on James Garfield's life, he was brought to Long Branch in hopes of a recovery aided by the sea air. Indeed, a railroad spur from the main line to his house was built to make him more comfortable in his travels. He continued, John Henry Turpin continued to list his mother as D.M. Turpin, living on Monmouth Avenue in Long Branch, New Jersey, in his naval file. Okay, he is listed here in the U.S. Navy in New York City on the 4th of November, 1896. He listed his mother, D. Turpin, and when he first was asked about his profession, he quoted that he had been a waiter. And so this is the first ship that he, it's like his induction area. And that's where it's kind of a call center for everybody to come and serve on this particular ship. So the USS Vermont, he was a mess attendant. This was a normal calling for all those that were Black at the time on a ship. He served there for a short time, and then he was transferred to the USS Maine. So there's the Maine, and that's the crew just before the explosion. Turpin is seen second from the right, and the second row standing, and captain is at the end of the first row standing on the right. So here is the Maine entering the harbor. So he had been aboard the USS Maine for a couple of years when it one night it exploded in the Havana harbor under mysterious circumstances on the 15th of February, 1898. Turpin was in the pantry of the wardroom when the explosion occurred and felt the ship heave and lift before all went dark. He worked his way aft and climbed out of the wardroom on the captain's ladder and up onto the deck. This also afforded him the opportunity to save another officer and Captain Sigsbee. He then dove overboard and was rescued by a motor launch. Turpin was one of 90 out of 350 officers and crewmen aboard the Maine that night to survive the explosion. And so that's what it looked like after the explosion. So the loss of 260 lives of his crewmates. There was an inquiry. There was an inquiry where Turpin was questioned, and his statement of what occurred during after the explosion. He talked about how dark it was, and that the ship was filling up with water. He relayed the panic of crew members about getting out of the ship, grabbing onto his feet and legs, which were impeded his own way of trying to get out for safety. At one point, he had brought one of the officers to almost a point of safety when he was directed by a lieutenant to hand over the captain, which he had, and to return to get the ship's documentation. And of course, the lieutenant took credit for saving the captain. When upon return, he was able to help another crew member and out to safety. Turpin helping others was dismissed, and this was never brought to anyone's attention for an award. I wrote that in. I read the interviews and stuff from back in 1896. If you wonder where I got 1898, where I got that information. And then this is the hospital where he went. He had some injuries and stuff, but he was sent here to recover. So they had even mentioned that they put a metal plate attached to his skull, and spent a few months in this Key West hospital in Florida after the explosion. Turpin was okayed for duty and transferred to the USS Montgomery. So here's the USS Montgomery at sea. Look at the sails and thing. And then he was transferred to the USS Badger. And then to the USS Independence. I mean, they just, here's the Badger. You wonder how these ships even sail, just by looking at them. I'm just like, I just feel so bad for them, So here's the USS Independence. But he was there in 1899 and then again 1901. Okay, let's see. He was okay. Here we go. So he was on by the spring of 1900. Boxer violence was virtually unchecked by the Chinese authorities. On May 30th, the foreign ministers of Peking, which is now Beijing, called for troops to protect the legations of Peking. 430 sailors and Marines, including 56 Americans from the USS Oregon and the USS Newark, from 8 countries arrived at the legations on the 31st of May and June 4th. On June 9th, the Boxers began attacking foreign property in sizable relief force just before the telegraph lines were cut. The first attempt to relieve the foreign legations at Peking consisted of over 2,100 men, mostly sailors and Marines, from Great Britain, Germany, Russia, France, and the United States. Japan, Italy, and Austria. The Allied force departed the city of Tenzin on June 10th, under the command of opposition force Seymour, to return to his battered column in Tetsin on the 22nd of June. So this was, they were doing, this was the at war portion for the Boxer Rebellion. And so they received naval commendations for being at war with the Boxer Rebellion. So this is just a little bit of what was going on there. So then over the next several months, the forces of the Western powers in Japan and China continued to grow. And then on February 1st, 1901, the Chinese authorities agreed to abolish the Boxer Society, and on September 7th, 1901, signed the Peace Protocol of Peking with the Allied nations, officially ending the Boxer Rebellion. So then, so here is so back again, I'm going to go back here. So back again to the USS Independence, November of 1901, just after the signing of the Treaty of the Boxer Rebellion. This was a hospital visit, as he needed serious medical attention. He had a really bad case of, I hate to go into this for everybody, but remember, he just came from China and stuff, but he had a really bad case of syphilis. And he was hospitalized for a few weeks here. It was noted that he had not been well for a couple of years from previous health checks, although it was noted that his vision was not affected, and he had 20/20 in the right eye and 10/20 in the left eye. So yeah, I mean, he was lucky in that regard. And after he was given the go for duty, he was transferred to the USS Alert. Then he was transferred again to the USS Tacoma. Nothing like letting your feet, grow anything underneath them, right? And then so after that, 1905, here's the USS Bennington. He was transferred to the USS Bennington. The Navy describing John Turpin as 5'11", weighs 167 pounds. Eyes were Negro, hair was Negro, complexion was Negro. Tattoos, sailor's head had letters JHT on his left forearm, dagger with letters JHT on his right forearm, and multiple scars on his back. Here's the men of the Bennington. And so at this point, it's no man left behind. So he'd been assigned to the gunboat, and Bennington's crew was preparing her to sail to the aid of the Monitor Wyoming, which had broken down and was in need of a tow. So they came from Hawaii originally, and had been there just a few days because they were having a few of their own mechanical problems, and they were there being outfitted for that. And then so when the Bennington was raising steam for departure from San Diego, California on July 21st, she suffered a boiler explosion that sent men and machinery into the air and killed 65 of the 102 men aboard. Turpin is reported to have saved 3 officers and 12 men by swimming them to shore one at a time. 11 men were awarded the Medal of Honor for, quote, extraordinary heroism displayed at the time of the explosion, unquote, that day, but Turpin was not among them. Turpin saved several other shipmates before here, but there are newspaper accounts of the day. I have actually from the San Diego Union that day, they called John Henry Turpin the hero of the day. That was a headline. because the newspaperman that was there saw him saving those lives, bringing them in from the ship. There is also a note that Leona sent me the other day about the ferry that was Spreckles, his ferry. It was called the Santa Fe. That it's a tug, and it pushed the Bennington into shoreline for everyone to to get it before it was actually sinking, because there was plenty of men that were still caught inside the ship. So here it's already been, you can see. So here's like the side of it, and there you can see in the distance there. The one on the left is a little closer, but the one in the distance, you can see it's up at the pier, and the men bringing people in. The citizens of San Diego really stepped up to the plate. There were all these boats that were out in the harbor. They were trying to help anybody that they saw that was in the water. And I had an account of a newspaper article 45 years later, like in 1950, that this man had come up to John Henry Turpin. He saw him at an event and he thanked him for his service. He hadn't seen him since that day. He was in his own boat out in the harbor, and John Henry Turpin had stopped and hung onto his little boat to catch his breath as he was going back to. He says, I have to go back. I can still hear them crying for him. So he went back for more of his shipmates. So he, here, that's him on the right, in the picture on your left. And then on the right, you can see a couple of years later when they had the dedication of the USS Bennington Monument that's in Fort Rosecrans Cemetery. There are several people that had donated money for that. The Los Angeles Naval the association, they had donated money, but also there was a local organization that right after the it was a organization of men of San Diego that were honoring the dead of their different societies, and one of them was the Sons of the Union Veterans of the Civil War and others. So there was a lot of different men that came together, and they voted within like a couple days afterwards that they had already okayed that they were honoring about 300 men of their own societies that had died in San Diego, that they were going to be planting trees in City Park, which is now Balboa Park. And they decided to add the men of the Bennington to that. So they added 70 trees just because they didn't know how many dead were going to come about, because they were dying a little bit at a time. Like there was some that were right off the bat, several that were in the hospital and that they later did die. And then there was, a few months later that some others died. So they wanted to make sure that they had enough trees for everybody. To honor them. And that's the Bennington Memorial Oak Grove that's in Balboa Park. So that was the citizens of San Diego that were contributing to that. And if you notice, if you've gone to the Bennington monument there's a little wall that's around that encases it. And then all of the headstones are of those that had passed. But that wall is also money from those men from San Diego that say, that they had collected money. They built that wall around that. They contributed to the obelisk, and they also built that wall around to protect those, make it a nice monument for those that had passed. So let's see, onward. Okay, so what next? So he's a survivor of the Maine and the USS Bennington, and that's a big deal, like the Boxer Rebellion, and then also diseases back then. That was not something that was taken lightly. I mean, they didn't have real cures for those kind of things, or it was a hit and miss thing. So he did survive that as well. So then these are a listing of all the different ships. I don't think, I don't know about Navy, because I'm not in the Navy, but maybe Judy, you know something about this. Um, he's on these many different ships after this. He's the USS Dakota, South Dakota, the Hartford, the Severn, the Snitzer, the Pittsburgh, and Cheyenne, and the USS Marblehead when he was in World War One. That was, to me, it was like every time he turned around, he was being transferred. But he had, I'll show you his medals here in a second. Go down. Come on. Okay, so advancing through his actions. So qualified, he was a marksman, small arms to big guns, torpedoes. He can swim, they tested him, he can swim 50 yards. He was rigging and handling all manner of machinery and guns, diving, hunting for all matters of lost articles and salvage, specializing in night diving without using lights. So these are all things in his file that the Navy had qualified him for. So they didn't want to lose him, and he was always striving to be better. So proficiency, look at this. His rating was very good. Seamanship was good. His marksmanship, he was great guns, very good. Marksmanship for small arms, very good. Signaling was fairly good. Sobriety, good to excellent. And obedience was fair to good. And overall, good to very good. And he had the good contact medals at the end of each of his stints of, I think, the 3-year or 4-year term. Every time he re-upped, he had received a good conduct medal. Okay, here we go. So service achievements. So he enlisted as a mess attendant, and then June 30th, 1898, he was a landsman. Then going up, ordinary seaman on February 1st, 1899. Then up to seaman, September 1st, 1899, and gunner's mate, 3rd class. Here, I'm going to move you guys over here so I can see my own thing. Okay, so gunner's mate, 3rd class, May 1st, and then gunner's mate, 2nd class, May 12th, and then gunner's mate, 1st class, 10/24, 1907, and gunner's mate, chief gunner's mate, May 26th, 1917. Okay, so these are his awards that he received. He received the Navy Expeditionary Medal, the Sampson Medal, the Spanish Campaign Medal, World War I Victory Medal, and the Good Contact Medals. Okay, and then there's the women behind. Oh, sorry, back. There we go. The women in his life. He was married to Isabella Paredes. I think it was within 10 days after the explosion. I think it was like August 1st. He was married to Isabella Paredes in 1905. And they made a big deal about it, in the newspaper that, oh, he married, and I think after 2 explosions that he survived, that he was scared that nobody would be there for him when he got out. It's just like, I'd be scared half to death that nobody would, be there to recognize him as, that he had somebody close to him. His mother was back east, so it was, anyway, it was quite a different kind of experience that he was married to her. But also in the records, it shows that in 1910, that Maud Lee had been married to him for 5 years. So that had to be put in 1905 as well. So he probably got some kind of a, as far as a disillusionment or whatever, shortly after that, and then got married to Maud Lee. And then he was married to Anna Lorino, and then Catherine Corson, and then Faye Alice Hollis, who he lived out the rest of his days with. It was kind of that he had actually he liked being married. Let's put it that way. So correcting an oversight, I've been working on this as far as looking at the different interviews from the Maine, and also there's some paperwork down in the hull actually of the Maritime Museum. And so I'm going to be, when this lifts and stuff, the COVID-19 like restrictions, they open that back up again. I'm going to be looking at the documentation that they have that's there, and looking at the chaplain's interviews from the day after the explosion. Because I went to the Medal of Honor people about this, and I got his file, and it was interesting to see that there's an eyewitness report that was in the newspaper, and it went over the National Wire Service reporting that about the Bennington disaster in over 100 newspapers, and they all were claiming that John Henry Turpin had rescued lives that day on board the Bennington. And that I think that the Navy would have stopped or halted that, or had something recanted, but they didn't. There's a dying declaration that was in the Hawaiian Gazette by Whitey, who was actually Joseph Gauthier, and it was logged on the date July 21st. He said that he told Big Bill, which Big Bill was his name for fighting. He was a boxer, and won many fights and stuff, and then later on he became an instructor at the Naval Academy for boxing. Anyway, Whitey told him to go back and save more lives. And then within an hour after that, Whitey died. But he had told Big Bill to go and save more lives, not to stay there. And someone else came over and started, so Bill took off. And but I thought that was interesting. So in 1950, I told you about that one, where that this man actually saw him and was there with his own rowboat and saw him. Okay, so now, so he's a hero for all ages. Now, while he was married to his wives during the time in the Navy, he was the Navy boxing champion, as I said, in several different weight classes through his naval career, and the boxing instructor at the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. While on the Bennington, the men referred to him as Big Bill, as I said, but I believe that this was his title for boxing. So they crowned him with that, that was his boxing name. When he was not on active duty, Turpin was employed. So he retired in 1917, but then he went back to, when World War I broke out, he went back and re-upped and went back in for a few more years. And notice all the stripes on his sleeve there. But when he was not on active duty, he was a master rigger at the Puget Sound Navy Yard in Bremerton, Washington, as a qualified master diver in his civilian duties. From 1938 through World War II, Turpin voluntarily toured Navy training facilities and defense plants for impromptu inspirational visits. And he died on March 10th, 1962. And at the time of his death, he was survived by his wife, Faye Alice Turpin. It was reported that his ashes were buried at sea following ceremonies for a hero aboard the carrier USS Carriage in 1962. But there is a headstone for him in the Bremerton next to Faye Alice Turpin. She has him on her headstone. And so there's pictures of him with medals of honor, and but if you talk to the people that I've talked to, the people at the Medal of Honor, the headquarters, they said he's not on their list. And so when I looked at his file, I ordered his file from, the National Archives, and it turns out that he had several letters that were filed there from different senators through time. And also there was a letter from John F. Kennedy in the early I think it was 1960, 61, that he wrote to the Medal of Honor board and asked them to fix it. But that never happened. So the response that I saw was that they didn't have anything written by the Navy to back it up. And so that's what I'm doing, is collecting the information that I can go to. I have a couple of friends that are rear admirals that are retired, and I'm going to go to them and ask them to, after I do all the work for them, then I'm going to ask them, see if they can go forward and connect me up. But I think it's just something to do posthumously. He did not have any kids. He does have nieces and nephews. And so it's just me tracking their descendants and stuff. So ultimately there could be, some nieces and nephew descendants that could go for a ceremony in regards to that. Let me see. What else? Here's a few things that I just wanted to make points of. So several publications also reported him receiving the Medal of Honor citations for saving the life of the Maine skipper, C.D. Sigsbee, and several crew members of the other, saving the lives of 12 crew members aboard the Bennington. And there's no record. So he had been the bearing of a person who would have received the medal and not make a big deal or a big thing of it. An article in the Salute, the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard newsletter, and other publications also credit him with helping to invent the underwater cutting torch. His service also included diving operations for a sunken submarine off of Honolulu in 1915. As previously stated, he was 6 feet. It said 5'11", but that was at the beginning of his, and I think he grew. Just like my uncle in his service records, he started out at 5'10", and he ended up 6'4" when he left the service. So people do grow. Let's see. Then, as previously stated, that he was also very impressive looking, popular figure that broke color barriers both in the Navy and in Bremerton as he worked in the shipyard. Everyone knew him. Everybody knew him, he said. And he carried himself in a very upright manner. That was his character. School kids would swarm around him on Navy Day. They'd let us in the shipyard, and we'd go on the ships. And when the kids would spot Dick, they'd surround him and talk to him. And then 1938, when I talked about that through World War II, Turpin voluntarily made those inspirational visits to the naval training centers and defense plants. He was a guest of honor on the reviewing stand in Seattle when the first Black volunteers were sworn into the Navy shortly after the attack on Pearl Harbor. He lived in Seattle later in life and was in several parades honoring him. And Turpin never wanted to part with the Navy. And according to one article, he requested mobilization at the age of 65 when World War II broke out. The request was turned down, but Turpin forgot his age and managed to remain a reservist. The citizens of Seattle and Bremerton had fond memories of Turpin. When the film Men of Honor, starring Cuba Gooding Jr., was released November 1st, 2000, it tells the story of Carl Brashear, known as the Navy's first Black master diver, when in fact the actuality happened 30 years earlier, before Carl was even born, when John Henry Turpin. So he also came up with the idea of torching. And if anybody saw that film with Cuba, that was part of that, is that he was an underwater diver and using the torch and everything. But it was John Henry that came up with that skill. And so that was a little bit about John Henry Turpin. He was a great man. Everybody loved him, and he was very patriotic and loved his country and served well. So that's it.